Being successful in enterprise sales for a SaaS company is quite a challenging feat. SaaS sales at the enterprise level require an ability to think strategically and understand complex personal dynamics, but it also requires a lot of energy and drive and enthusiasm as you move the client and help the client move toward making a decision and moving away from the status quo. It's a rare combination of skills, and that's why I was really interested when I met Melanee a few months ago. Melanee is an account executive for a leading SaaS provider, and she comes to each of the opportunities that she works with an incredible amount of enthusiasm, but also with a sophistication and an ability to understand the complex nature of these deals and help their clients move forward and actually transact. So I'm welcoming Melanee on the show. Thank you very much, Melanee, for jumping on and having a conversation with us. We were talking just a second ago about traveling and some of the things you've done earlier. I'm sure that over the years you've been a part of a number of presidents clubs and had some incredible trips. And I think that might be something that might be interesting to start with is, if you think back over all the trips you've done, which one has been most impactful for you and what you've enjoyed the most, or maybe that has most kind of recharged your batteries, right?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's a specific President's Club that I can remember kind of recharging me. I had been with the company for over almost 4 years, and I was pregnant my almost the entire year, and I still made my number that year, and that was pretty impressive considering I was out for about 6 months with a sick kid. So I was super successful, and when I came back, I found out that I had made President's Club, and it was really needed, really needed at the time. And it was to St. John, Virgin Islands. And at that time, we had just been acquired through a new company. So there was new leadership. I was kind of an unknown, but a successful unknown. And so I used the opportunity to meet that executive leadership team to make sure going forward I had the right connections. But more importantly, it really did recharge from such a tough year of having a new baby, and managing being a mom as well as working a job and working
Yeah.
a successful job.
You're recharging from both the job and the new mom. And I've been through that baby boot camp, and it is awfully tough, right? To get
Yes.
through that in the first couple months.
For sure. So that President's Club, I walked out of there and I felt great because I made great alignment with the executive team, and I felt recharged that I could start the year with great success. With that one, I took obviously an extra days and so forth, but really recharged my batteries.
Sure. Well, so I'm sure that I'm sure you didn't start your career obviously in the role that you have right now. So I'm thinking about, like, how did you move up through the ranks of sales, and where did you get your start, and what was that first step look like for you?
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out when I was graduating what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I really decided I wanted to travel and I wanted to be in front of customers. I didn't really know what I didn't know. So to me, I was like, I want to do trade shows. And through networking, I was able to secure a position as a lead generation representative that got to go to trade shows, got to scan the badges. And I was like, that's not something that I really enjoy. But I would come back from those trade shows and qualify deals for senior salespeople out in the field so that they could, start to pursue in the sales process. And what I found was I enjoyed having those conversations with the customer or prospect, but more importantly, I loved getting the right information over to that field salesperson so that they could be successful and I could see the journey of the sales cycle and them winning. And I was like, I want to do that. So with success and lead generation, they promoted me to an inside sales job. They actually created the job for me. And I had like $50 million to $300 million companies in a 9-state territory, and it was all over the phone. It was EDI software. And my first deal was to the Radio Flyer, the little red wagon. Yeah, that was my first deal, and I was hooked ever since.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. What do you think your leadership saw in that first role that made them want to promote you into and create the role for you into this inside sale role?
Yeah, I think the stick-to-itiveness or tenacity, or I mean, if you think about doing lead generation, that's a lot of, smiling
Yeah.
and dialing and getting a lot of no's. That can be hard on the person's, mental state if you're getting no's all the time. But I was never deterred from that. And I always felt like if I could just have the right conversation with the right person, I could get in front of them about the software.
Yeah.
So I think that tenacity showed through, and that's why I was promoted to an inside salesperson at the time.
Yeah, I've also had those jobs before with the 100, 140 calls in a day, and it is quite brutal to go through that. What I always did was I tried to think of it like I'd be surprised if they said no. Like, really? You don't want to talk to me?
Right.
And if you could convince yourself psychologically that there was something that changed in the tone of my voice that made them respond better to me, which I don't know
and
why that
and
was.
you also have to have, a strong backbone. So it got to the point where, some people would just hang up. Back in the day, that's what people did. And I got to the point where, like, that's not very professional or nice, and I would call them back, and oh, we must have gotten disconnected. So even though I knew that they hung up on me, it just made me appreciate when I did actually get to talk to someone, to your point. But you have to do things in the situation where you can be beaten down a little bit. You have to change your voice or kind of make fun of yourself by calling them back and calling them out on hanging up on you. You have to do things like that to get you through to the next phase.
Yeah, if you survive that, then you're kind of bulletproof when it comes to rejection and those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so you obviously work with people who are probably earlier in their sales career now, I'm guessing, right? People who are inside roles. Um, what do you look for when you're working with those individuals? What do you see from your perspective now as an EA, in terms of how effective they are and why they're effective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I look for somebody that does more than the minimum. I try to do more than the minimum. That's how I think I'm successful. Um, I do more than what's required. And when I'm working and partnering with an inside salesperson to help support and drive revenue of the pipeline and so forth, I try to recognize or find that characteristic that they're going to go above and beyond. Because if they're not going to go above and beyond, um, they're not going to be successful. It is hard to get that first conversation. It is very hard to get that first conversation. But then you have to do something with it and turn it into something that's good for the salesperson, right? So when I'm working with my ISR, I'm like trying to coach on doing more than just calls. Is it, is it videos? Is it sending content? Is it putting together landing pages to differentiate not only that individual, but myself as well as iCertis as a whole or a company as a whole?
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, you're now in this position of selling SaaS applications to enterprise-sized clients, right? And those are famously very complex, difficult deals to get closed. And I'm sure that's if you think back through all the things you've sold throughout your career, I'm guessing this is probably one of the more challenging and nuanced sales that you might make. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the differences are and how you've had to adapt your approach?
Yeah, and I think I have a little bit different point of view only because I have never just stayed in one industry or sold one type of software. If you look at my resume, I've sold software my entire career, but it has been many different types of software. I've sold business intelligence. I've sold Microsoft. I've sold services. I've sold identity management, so really technical sale. I've sold a couple of different SaaS solutions specific to like field service and now contract lifecycle management. And so I think that says a lot that, I'm pretty well rounded. And I approach every deal or every prospect or every customer with, I'm not the expert, but I want to help you reach your goals. And so even in the most complex or the most simple sales process, if you're not keeping what their goals are, what their outcomes are going to be with any type of technology, you really can't align and be an advocate for them. And I think that actually is really important when you're doing complex deals of being an advocate for your customer. I'm not just an advocate for the company that I work for. I have to align that with what the customer's requirements are.
In some cases, though, with enterprise sales, you might end up with, half a dozen different decision makers or influencers, right?
Right.
Who all have conflicting priorities and conflicting objectives. How do you juggle that? How do you juggle different people and show leadership on the client side too?
To me, that's almost like multiple sales cycles within one, which is why it's so complex, right? So whatever I might be showing to one stakeholder that I know is imperative for them to reach their goals and initiatives and all their priorities, another group that has influence or will be part of the decision has completely opposite. I'm selling to them as well in a different conversation or in a group conversation. I have to be aware that I have to hit whoever's in the room, all of those different things. So that takes not getting single threaded, talking to multiple people within the organization, building relationships, horizontally. I think it's imperative in those complex sales cycles that you are aligned to multiple people. And most importantly, you find a champion to help you.
Have you ever had a situation where clients will kind of talk about each other behind their backs and like where you end up kind of being the therapist within the group?
Yeah, for sure. And for me, that's additional information, right? So I don't look at it as, somebody's talking about somebody else or whatever. To me, it's more information, and knowledge is power when you're trying to close deals. So I take that lens or point of view when I'm having those conversations. It's knowledge, and that's going to help me succeed and when I really need to get ink on paper.
So what do you see as being the primary cause when people who are new to that high level account executive role, when they fail? Like, what causes them to fail?
Yeah, and I think part of it is you just don't know what you don't know yet. So it is a journey and learning experience. But in that maybe, somebody new to a complex sales cycle, they get single threaded.
Sure.
They believe everything that person says. And I mean, I remember doing that, and I walked out, of that loss thinking I got outsold, because I was so single threaded and I wasn't talking to other individuals in the organization. Even though that I would say champion was coaching us and telling us these things, the person that was actually saying yes on paper, I didn't align with that. So I lost the deal.
It sounds like you have one in particular in mind. What is the deal that got away, or the big one that you wish you would have closed?
I have few. I have more than a few. And again, I think a loss is just as important as a win. You learn so much when you lose. And really early on, I always did postmortem, conversations internally with my team, as well as the customer or prospect would allow. It's imperative to be able to do that, to kind of grow and learn. But I would say one of my biggest losses was a very large railroad company, and I thought that I was really aligned across the executive leadership team. I really felt that I was, and I had a coach and a champion and all of the things that you need to drive your sales cycle forward. And I was doing that. And I wasn't doing checks and balances with everyone, though. Remember, knowledge is power, and I was taking knowledge, but I wasn't validating things and so forth. So I had this perception of what I thought was going on, and the other perception, the reality was completely different.
Yeah.
So there was a executive relationship that there was no way I was going to beat, but I was unaware of it.
Yeah.
And so I lost that deal, and I feel like I got the the lesson learned was I was outsold. So every single time today, when I go into a deal, how am I not going to be outsold? So those are kind of the things I think about in all opportunities.
Yeah, it's easy to get blindsided by the executive that's kind of hiding that behind their vest. I've had also the opposite happen too before, where I've been really well connected to the C-level, and then the C-level says, "Well, I'm not the guy actually implementing the thing, so Pete, what do you think?" And Pete's
Right,
like 4 levels down, and Pete's like, "Well, we should go with this. My uncle told me."
right.
And yeah, but you're right. Like that's what enterprise sales is about. Is it's understanding all the different levels and trying to make a dozen sales within the one, so that everyone can be on
And
board.
validating the information nonstop with multiple people along the way.
Yeah, right, right. So when it comes down to actually closing the business, is that just kind of a natural consequence of the sales process, or like how do you bring a client forward to that close if they're for internal reasons or whatever kind of reticent to actually make the decision and pull the trigger?
Yeah, so I'm a salesperson. I'm not vague, and you worked with me previously. I'm not a vague person in conversation. I'm pretty direct and transparent. That's kind of my style, and it's worked for me for a number of years in my career. So that part to me is part of the process, part of the pursuit, and you can lose a deal in just that closing process as well because you didn't have the right documents. You didn't understand the process for the prospect. You didn't understand what needs to happen internally on your side. And when you're working these complex deals, I find that you need to work with your prospect on agreeing to, we call it a joint execution plan. Some people call it sequence of activities, whatever. But from today that they want to move forward with you to the end of ink on paper, what needs to happen. If you miss any of those things, your deal could blow up. So I think it's just as important as those, the demos and the discovery and all the things that happen. That closing part of the sales cycle is imperative to know and be direct about how you're going to get those steps done.
Yeah, and you're saying actually like literally you build it out into a plan, and it's this like co-delivered plan to actually get the signature on the page.
Yes, because if I can get my customer to agree to that, then I can hold him accountable at the end when he says, "Hey, we're not getting signature, but you said we were going to do all these things, and this was going to benefit with signature." So I feel like, and because I really believe in the relationship that I build in a process, that I have the right at that point to call them out on that.
Yeah, well, and it's also funny and surprising to me how many prospects I've worked with over the years who don't understand their own process for approving deals, like what
Yes.
action it's going to take to do it.
Yes.
That's pretty common.
And it's a journey to even understand that, right? It's lesson learned, like you do your first deal with your new company and you don't understand the process. So you have somebody holding your hand, you're better, but you still don't know it. So on the next deal, you know more, you're still not going to get it all. I mean, it is a process to learn how internally the company that you're working for, how to get a deal done. So you can imagine the person that you're selling to, if they don't have a good understanding of how to purchase software when they're with their organization, where there's a disconnect and sometimes deals don't happen.
Yeah. Well, so we talked through the challenges of the sales profession, meaning like losing deals, obviously, and then getting things closed. What about the other side of it too? Like, if you think back through your career, is there a deal that sticks out in your head that was something you're really proud of? Maybe not because it was the biggest number, but because you knew you really helped the client out and they were able to achieve some, massively important objective for themselves.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that stand out, but I was selling identity management software, which is a highly technical sale. And I really relied on my solution architect and in the pre-sales process. But that was a very complex, long sales cycle. It was about a 2-year sales cycle with a Fortune 500 company. And I was not only trying to sell them the technology, but there was education that needed to happen. So, which is why very high level technical sales.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to educate and so forth. So, and it's not just one person, it is multiple stakeholders in a Fortune 500 company that you have to understand what use cases there are. What does success look like for each one of the folks that will benefit from the technology? And that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. I think the biggest reason I'm successful in any of the deals that I've closed is because I try very hard to set appropriate expectations and follow through. So I don't like to say, oh, I'll get it to you tomorrow and get it to them 3 days later. It's a pet peeve of mine. So I approach every single prospect that if I do right by them and I'm an advocate for them, that when they leave their company or I go on to another company, I can always come back and sell to them again. And I try to approach every single sale like that.
It seems like that's one of the ways that sales careers can really start to gain momentum is you start developing the relationships so that as you move through different roles or whatever it might be, you can come back and you're not starting from scratch every single time, right?
Exactly. And that which you have to be able to prove that you're somebody, that does what they say they're going to do and is really being an advocate for them, so that when there's a new role or I'm selling something new, that they want to talk to me again. And I feel like in my, number of years selling, I could go back to the majority of my folks that I've sold to and sell to them again. I have. I mean, I've done that multiple times.
Well, it's an interesting note to end on. I really appreciate you making time for us today and talking through it. You've had obviously an amazing career in sales, and congratulations on that. And yeah, thank you for all of your thoughts on how to help other people get that same kind of career.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity.